Hi, I'm Kalis. The day I completed our $3.4 billion design, my brother, my own flesh and blood, looked me in the eye and said, "You're no longer needed." They erased my badge, my name, my legacy, and thought I'd just vanish. But they forgot one thing. I wrote the contract. Now, their empire's crumbling brick by brick, and I haven't even raised my voice, yet. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. It was just past 4 on a Friday when I stood in front of the boardroom, 32 floors up, surrounded by men in expensive watches and women whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. The windows framed the Dallas skyline like a painting, golden sun melting into the high-rise glass. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. Not because I was nervous, but because this was the work of 10 years, the kind of system that could rewire global logistics, and I was proud of it. I took a steady breath and started the demo. Behind me, the screen came alive with a clean interface, data humming in real time like music I knew by heart. This is what happens when predictive routing integrates with supplier volatility and weather-based delay indexes, I explained, fingers tapping through live simulations. The numbers shifted, efficiency soared, costs dropped. They saw it. I knew they saw it. Across the table, Jeremiah, my brother, the CEO, watched without blinking. The corners of his mouth curled up just enough to be unreadable, cold, calculating. Beside him, the chair our father once filled sat empty. His face flickered silently on a monitor to the side, propped up in a hospital bed, weak from his third surgery. Still watching, still present. I pretended that meant something. When I finished, the room offered a round of polite applause, the kind that's performed more than felt. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling that odd quiet that comes not from doubt, but from finality. Then Jeremiah stood. "Kalis," he said, smooth as a boardroom salesman, "you've done incredible work." There was a beat of silence. And that's why this next part is hard. I felt the room shift, not physically but emotionally, like something had cracked. "We've been reevaluating the company structure," he continued. "As of today, your position has been made redundant, effective immediately." The words didn't land right. I blinked. I looked around, waiting for the punchline. Jeremiah didn't smile. The door behind me opened, and I heard the sharp click of heels. HR. A woman I barely knew by name, but who already held a sealed envelope. My access badge was asked for. Quietly, clinically. The screen behind me? My name disappeared off the project board with a soft beep. No one looked surprised, not even my mother, who was sitting at the end of the table. She didn't raise her eyes. She stared into her coffee, untouched, like it had been poured for show. Her pearls shifted slightly as she crossed her arms tighter. But still, she said nothing. I stood there for a moment, unsure what would be more dignified, fighting or walking away. I chose the latter. Without a word, I slid my laptop into its case. My hands moved with mechanical precision. Click, zip, lift. I didn't say goodbye. Not to Jeremiah, not to the board, not even to the woman from HR who shifted awkwardly as she stepped aside. As I walked toward the elevator, the receptionist looked up and then away. I tapped my badge on the reader. It blinked red. Of course. She buzzed me through without a word. The elevator doors closed slowly, as if the whole building was trying to memorize my exit. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel of my car for longer than I care to admit. The sun had dropped lower now, cutting long shadows across the asphalt. I placed both hands on the steering wheel, steadying myself. Not because I was shocked. No, that part had passed. What I felt was fury. Deep. Old. Familiar. They didn't just fire me, they erased me. From my own work, from the very system I built from scratch while sleeping 4 hours a night and skipping every holiday for 3 years. I whispered, "They forgot something." The words floated in the stillness of the car. That system? It was never theirs to own? Because they didn't read the fine print. They didn't remember the clause in the contract. The one our father insisted on 10 years ago, back when he still believed I was the future of this company. when he wanted to protect me from what he knew my brother would become. As I pulled out of the lot, the building loomed behind me like a ghost made of glass and silence. The sun caught the tower just right, turning it copper. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. And as I merged onto the highway, I remembered the contract had my name on it. I didn't drive home right away. I circled the block twice before finally pulling into my driveway, headlights cutting through the quiet street like a blade. My fingers were still curled tight around the steering wheel. The tower downtown had disappeared in the rear view, but it still sat heavy in my chest. I shut the engine off and sat in the silence, listening to the soft tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. Then I remembered, no, I knew, what they'd forgotten. The contract, the licensing clause, my name. Inside my modest little house, 2 bedrooms, a creaky hallway, and walls that still smelled faintly of cedar from the last stain job, I made a beeline to my bedroom. I dropped my bag on the floor, got on my knees, and reached under the bed. The fireproof file box scraped against the floorboards as I pulled it out. I hadn't opened it in years. I didn't need to. But tonight it felt like my last shield. The latch clicked open. Inside, everything was in place. Dividers labeled in my handwriting, a row of old flash drives, and tucked inside a thick plastic sleeve, the original contract for System Ares. I sat back on my heels and flipped to page 7. There it was. Intellectual property and licensing, all rights pertaining to the proprietary algorithms and frameworks of System Ares shall remain the sole property of the original creator unless explicitly renegotiated in writing. There was no amendment, no renegotiation. They never thought I'd need it. I leaned back against the foot of the bed, breathing slowly, my pulse finally catching up to my thoughts. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about reminding myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined my role in building the company from scratch. They could remove me from the boardroom, they could deactivate my badge, but this contract, they couldn't erase this. As I stared at the page, my mind drifted back to that moment years ago. I was 29, fresh off a brutal product cycle and presenting the first functional model of Ares in that same conference room. Dad had been stronger then, still walking around the office, still shaking hands. I remembered his smile that day. "You're the engine behind this company, Kalis," he'd said. But when I handed him the prototype papers, signed solely by me, Mom had leaned over his shoulder, lips pressed into a thin line. "Shouldn't you be sharing credit with your brother?" she muttered. I didn't respond. I just looked at her and said, "I built this system alone." That silence, the one that followed, was the first sign of what I now knew had always been there. An unspoken rule in our family. What's mine is theirs, but what's theirs is never mine. I didn't share, and now, that one stubborn decision was the only leverage I had. I slid the contract back into its sleeve and stood. My knees cracked as I straightened, one of the few reminders these days that I wasn't in my 20s anymore. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, then grabbed my keys again. There was only one person I trusted with this next step, Judith Way. Her office sat above a dusty flower shop downtown. No receptionist, no fancy signage, just a small nameplate and a bell that rang when I pushed the door open. The faint scent of dried roses still hung in the air. She was seated at her desk in reading glasses and a worn shawl, thumbing through a paperback with pages curled at the edges. I didn't even say hello. I just handed her the folder. She glanced up, her gaze steady, sharp despite the years. "Told you you'd need this one day," she said quietly, opening the contract. I sat down across from her, the same way I had 6 years ago when we drafted it together over 2 long evenings and too many cups of mint tea. She flipped through the pages, pausing at the licensing clause. "They didn't renegotiate?" she asked. "No." "And they fired you today?" In front of the entire board, not even a heads up. She closed the folder with deliberate calm. "Well," she said, sliding her glasses down her nose. "Then they've got a problem. Because if they so much as use a line of that code without permission, it's federal IP violation." I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just said, "Let's send them a reminder." She turned toward her computer, started typing. Her fingers moved slower than they used to, but every word she wrote was precise, clear, no threats, no insults, just facts and consequences. When she was done, she printed the letter, signed it, then slid it across the table for my signature. "This'll go to their legal team by morning," she said, "but I suggest you add a personal touch." I pulled a sticky note from my purse, wrote 7 words, then stuck it to the front of the envelope. "You forgot whose name made this company." By the time I stepped back out into the night, the streetlights had flickered on. My breath fogged in the air. I looked up at the stars. Not to wish, but to mark the quiet moment before the storm. They thought I'd just leave, but they forgot something else too. The courts. They would not. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just stared at the ceiling with the dim light from the hallway stretching across my floor like a quiet accusation. Around 5:10 a.m., I got up, brewed a cup of bitter coffee, and packed my bag like it was just another Tuesday, slipped on a blazer, combed my hair back. I even put on the badge clipped to my collar, more out of habit than hope. The tech headquarters in Austin always looked different in the early morning. Cleaner, colder. The tinted glass shimmered under the rising sun like it didn't remember a single face that built the empire inside. I approached the door, badge in hand, and held it up to the reader. Nothing. I tried again, once more for good measure. Still nothing. I glanced at the security camera overhead, then pushed the buzzer on the intercom. The lobby lights flickered to life and a young guard walked over. New face. Didn't even try to look apologetic. "Ma'am, your badge isn't in the system." I held it up anyway. "It was yesterday." He hesitated, checked his screen, then said flatly, "You're not listed." Behind him, I could see the reception desk. Sarah, the same woman who once gave me birthday flowers, stood stiff, pretending not to notice me, but her eyes flicked toward the guard, then back at her monitor. I raised an eyebrow. She finally met my gaze. "They said you resigned yesterday," she murmured, voice low but sharp, like it had been rehearsed. I didn't argue, just nodded once, thanked them both, and turned away. My heels clicked across the concrete like punctuation marks I wasn't allowed to write anymore. From the sidewalk, I walked around the corner and stopped at the glass wall that framed the executive boardroom. It was all windows, designed to show transparency, though nothing about it ever really was. Inside, I saw them. Garrett, my brother, stood where I used to stand. Same charcoal suit, same cadence I once coached him into using. He waved a laser pointer across a projection screen with my slides, my design, my projections. Behind him sat my mother. Perfect posture, arms crossed, watching him like she'd always wanted to see him in that seat. My cousin Jonah leaned in, whispering something to her. She laughed. I stepped back just a bit, not because it hurt, not visibly. The words on the screen stopped me cold. System Aries, 2026-2029 growth pipeline. Still mine. I lifted my phone and snapped a picture. Not out of spite, but as proof. Something to remind myself later that I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine my own contribution. The wind picked up. I took a deep breath, slipped the phone into my coat pocket, and walked away. The ache didn't show, but it was there, low and steady, like a pulled muscle you can't quite rest. A few blocks down, I ducked into Rosie's, a small cafe I used to frequent during late-night coding marathons. It hadn't changed. Faded menus, mismatched mugs, and the smell of slightly burned coffee that somehow made it feel like home. There, by the window, sat Benny. Benny had been the night janitor in our R&D lab for nearly 2 decades. He knew every wire under every floor tile and had seen me when I was just 17, hunched over prototypes in the break room, running on Red Bull and ambition. "I figured you might come here," he said as I slid into the booth. His eyes studied me carefully the way older people do when they've seen enough betrayal to recognize the shape of it before you say a word. "They removed your parking sign last night," he said softly. Didn't think much of it until I saw the cameras being wiped too. My chest tightened. I thought, just in case. He slid a small USB stick across the table. Security backup, meeting files. I copied what I could before they shut things down. I stared at it. My fingers hovered, hesitant, then slowly closed around it. "You didn't have to," I whispered. "Kalis," he said firmly, "you've never asked for credit. That's what they counted on." We sat for a moment, letting the words settle. Then he added, "You still drink chamomile?" I nodded, managing a half smile. "Good, because you're gonna need your nerves." By the time I got back to my small place outside the city, the sun was high, and my blazer felt tight at the shoulders. I kicked off my shoes, sat cross-legged on the floor, and plugged the flash drive into my old laptop, the same one I'd coded Ari's on. The files loaded slowly. Meeting recordings, board minutes, a time-stamped memo labeled IP Consolidation Strategy. I clicked. "We've expedited Kalis's removal. She holds foundational rights, but if we move fast, consolidate before she challenges, we'll absorb the risk." A different voice, maybe Garrett's, added, "She doesn't even have access anymore. She's isolated. We control the narrative now." I didn't flinch, didn't throw the laptop, didn't scream. I just sat there. Then quietly, like it was a truth I hadn't dared speak aloud in years, I murmured, "You erased me, but your system still runs on my code." And then I pulled my chair closer, because tonight I wasn't just going to sit and watch. Tonight I had the keys, and I just hit enter. I closed the laptop slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of precision, like flipping the final switch on a circuit I'd spent years building in silence. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the ceiling fan. My desk light cast a warm glow across the old bookshelf where the fireproof safe sat, wedged between engineering textbooks and a dusty coffee tin full of paper clips. I got up and crouched in front of the safe. The combination lock clicked into place under my fingertips, muscle memory guiding me faster than thought. I hadn't opened it in years, but everything I needed was there, untouched. Inside was the black folder. Its corners were frayed, the edges faded. But when I unlatched it and opened the cover, the ink on the first page was as bold as the day I signed it. The original system design, blueprints, full-stack architecture breakdowns, framework notes dated months before we even incorporated the family LLC, and clipped to the back cover, a notarized co-patent filing, my name listed first, then Dr. Roger Miles, my grandfather. I exhaled, slow and steady. "They thought I was just the engineer," I murmured, flipping to the patent seal. "Not the architect, not the owner." The contract came next. I slid it from its plastic sleeve, the pages still crisp. It was the master agreement my grandfather had drafted with me before we ever brought Garrett or Mother into the fold. His logic had been clear. Always protect your code. Family changes, ownership doesn't. Clause 7C sat in the middle of page 5, almost invisible in its simplicity. Any derivative system or scaling model using framework Ares v1.0 must retain original designer's royalty and control rights. And beneath that, one signature, mine. I traced the ink with my finger. It wasn't just a formality. It was a firewall, one they hadn't seen or had chosen to ignore. "They built a $3.4 billion empire," I whispered, "on something they never owned." The heat under my ribcage rose, not fury, not grief, but a kind of righteous clarity that felt like standing barefoot on cool concrete after a fire. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to barge in. They had already built their house on my foundation, and I still held the deed. I reached for my laptop again and opened a blank email. The address was still pinned in my starred list, mkacardinalstrategics.com. Michael Keyes, my former mentor, now general counsel for our biggest competitor in the defense space. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since he left to avoid the family drama. He'd always told me, "Call me when you're ready to play offense." I typed only 2 words in the subject line, IP violation. The body of the email was short, Attached: System Aries v1.0 source code license, time-stamped logs, co-patent registration, and master contract, Clause 7C. Underneath, I added a single line. They erased me. I'm reclaiming what's mine. I hovered a second, then hit send. Less than 6 minutes later, his reply popped in. Subject: Re-IP violation body. Let me get legal on this. Also, damn, Kalis. I stared at the screen for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. A quiet, almost reverent kind of satisfaction filled my lungs. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, and it would. As night fell, I lit a small candle on the windowsill. I didn't do it for ceremony or theatrics. I did it because it was how my grandfather used to end every finished blueprint session. One flame, one breath, one prayer for the next step. I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, watching the flame shift and bend in the glass. You were right, I said aloud. The quiet ones hold the fuse. Outside, the city hummed as usual, traffic lights blinking, engines rumbling in the distance. But somewhere behind those walls and boardrooms, the fuse had already been lit, and I wasn't walking away. Not this time. The knock came just as the kettle clicked off. At first, I thought it was the usual delivery guy. Early packages and tight schedules were normal in my neighborhood. But when I opened the door, the man in the navy blue windbreaker wasn't holding a box. He was holding a heavy envelope with a Department of Justice seal. He didn't say much, just confirmed my name and handed it to me. Across town, at the Clyburn Tech headquarters, it was Julius's usual Monday war room. He called it a strategy meeting, but it was more like his personal stage. The long glass table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and everyone around it had their laptops open, coffee mugs steaming, and eyes darting between charts and forecasts. He was in the middle of reviewing quarterly numbers, smirking as he described how we'll scale the Ares module into aerospace, corner the NATO tender, and crush competitors by Q3, when the conference room door opened. Not slowly, not discreetly. It slammed. 2 security officers stood at the threshold, flanking a man in a charcoal gray suit. The room fell silent. You could hear the HVAC humming above them. "Are you Julius Clyburn?" the man asked plainly. Julius blinked, startled. "Yes." The man extended a sealed envelope toward him. "Federal court summons. Immediate compliance required." Julius didn't even take it. One of the interns reached over and grabbed it like it might burn. When he finally peeled the wax seal back and opened the trifold papers inside, his jaw slackened. "Effective immediately," he read aloud, his voice going hollow. "You are enjoined from any continued development, deployment, or commercialization of the Ares framework, pending investigation into misappropriated intellectual property." No one spoke, not even Kyle, the COO, who usually had something slick to say. His face went gray. Then, right there in his chair, he slumped over, fainted. The paper trembled in Julius's hands, but he didn't speak again. Not yet. Across 3 floors below, in the executive boardroom, chaos was unraveling fast. They had called an emergency session, and the usual polished politeness had given way to raw panic. "We invested $92 million last quarter alone," one of the European investors shouted, throwing a pen across the table. "If the injunction holds, we lose defense contracts. We'll get blacklisted." Another added, "We were told the patent issue was handled. Where's your legal team?" Cassandra, the general counsel, flipped through her binder with trembling fingers. Sweat gathered at her temples. We never received a notarized assignment of her IP. There's a clause here, Clause 7C, signed solely under her name. I don't know how we missed this. I thought..." She trailed off, eyes darting around the room. Someone hissed from the end of the table, "Who let this pass without verification? Who signed off on product launch?" Julius's knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Then he muttered under his breath, "She was family. We didn't think she'd..." And then he stopped talking entirely. He couldn't say what everyone in the room already knew. They'd dismissed me like a worker bee, not realizing I built the hive. Back in my small studio, the sun was pouring through the dusty blinds. I'd opened both my monitors, streaming CNBC on one and a defense industry blog on the other. The headline was already rolling in bold. Breaking. Defense contractor Clyburn Tech receives federal injunction over IP dispute. Whistleblower identified as co-architect. They didn't use my full name, but they didn't need to. Those who knew already knew. I didn't gloat. I didn't pace or pop champagne. I just sat there, still in my robe, sipping lukewarm tea. Then I opened my journal. With a black gel pen, in steady, even strokes, I wrote, "Dignity is quiet. So is destruction." That was something my grandfather used to say. He believed in quiet justice, the kind that didn't scream or flail. It just arrived, exact and irreversible. Later that afternoon, just as I'd returned from dropping off a package at the corner FedEx, my phone rang. I hesitated. It wasn't a number I had saved, but the area code was familiar, Maryland. When I answered, a hesitant voice came through the line. "Kalis? It's Marcia. Marcia Clyburn, Julius's wife. She was the only one in that entire family who ever showed me an ounce of warmth. We weren't close, but she once brought soup when I had the flu. She remembered my birthday. Small things. "They're panicking," she said. I could hear shuffling papers and muffled voices in the background. "Julius hasn't eaten since this morning. He keeps repeating your name, says this'll burn everything down." I said nothing. She paused, then added, softly, "He said it'll ruin the company, his legacy." My voice stayed level. "He ruined something else first." There was silence between us, the kind that stretches. I added, "Tell him this isn't revenge. It's revelation. I didn't destroy anything. I just removed the curtain." Marcia didn't argue. Maybe she understood. Or maybe she just didn't know what to say. Before she hung up, her voice dropped even lower. "Kalis, he's not sleeping. He's scared." I didn't answer right away. Then, calmly, I said, "He should be." By nightfall, the news had spread to every major outlet. My inbox was flooded. Lawyers, journalists, former colleagues, even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years, but I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I took a long shower, braided my hair back, and pulled the quilt tight over my legs. Outside, rain had started falling, steady and deliberate, just like everything I'd done so far. So what they failed to understand was that silence isn't passivity. Sometimes it's just preparation. I didn't expect the past to show up that night, wearing a rain-soaked uniform and holding my old key. But there he stood, dripping on the welcome mat of my small apartment, eyes darting from the hallway to my face. "Kalis?" he said softly, almost like a question. "It's me, Reese." I blinked. Reese, the former head of corporate security, fired without ceremony months ago. He'd vanished like a whisper, no goodbye, no protest, just a resignation that felt too quiet to be real. He took a hesitant step forward, lifting a gloved hand. In his palm was a small flash drive, wrapped tightly in a plastic sandwich bag. "I saved what I could," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever get the guts to bring it." I stepped aside and gestured him in. Once inside, I tossed him a towel and turned the kettle on. The air between us stayed taut. I didn't press him. I just let the space breathe. We sat on my worn couch as he dried off. I handed him a chipped mug of tea and opened my laptop. Without a word, he passed me the drive. "Whatever happens after this," he murmured, "I need you to know I tried to warn them. I really did." I nodded. "I know you did, Reese." We plugged in the drive. At first, it was folders, ordinary, boring names. But as I opened them, one by one, the air in the room shifted. The files weren't just documents. They were landmines. A video opened first, grainy but clear. A boardroom call, time-stamped 6 months before I was forced out. Julius's voice echoed through my speakers. "She's quiet, always has been. She won't say a word. She still thinks we're her family." Another clip. A slideshow presentation. My name had clearly been typed on an early version of the inventor roster, then erased. You could see the blinking cursor where it had been deleted. Then a long thread of emails. The subject line chilled me. Remove her quietly. I leaned back. My fingers curled around the mug, now lukewarm. They made me scrub the servers after, Reese said, his voice low. But I'd already mirrored it all onto a backup at home, just in case. The words felt heavy, not just because of what he'd saved, but because of the quiet courage it took to do it alone. In a company that thrived on silence and intimidation, he'd held on to the truth for months, for me. I emailed the files to Martin, my attorney, right away. He picked up after the second ring. "Tell me you're not joking," he said as he opened the first attachment. "I'm not," I replied flatly. There was a pause, then a soft whistle. "Kalis, this isn't just civil. This is criminal, wire fraud, contract tampering, IP misrepresentation on federal grant applications, and they recorded it all like it was a Netflix pilot. He didn't ask me if I was ready, he just said, 'I'm driving this to the prosecutor's office tonight, I'll call you in the morning.'" When I hung up, Reese was still sitting there, silent. I walked into the kitchen and began preparing something simple: grilled cheese and tomato soup. The kind of dinner you make when the world feels too complicated for anything fancier. He helped me butter the bread, like we used to do on overnight shifts back when he was still with the company, back before I learned just how fragile trust could be. As we ate, I finally asked the question I'd been holding since he knocked on my door. "Why now, Reese?" He didn't answer right away. He set his spoon down gently, looked at me, then down at the steam rising from his bowl. "Because everyone else stepped on me when I lost everything," he said. "You didn't. You saw me. You asked if I was okay when I got demoted, when my kid was in the hospital and I had to sleep in the break room." I swallowed, remembering those nights. He'd always looked tired but never bitter. He looked up again. "They think quiet means weak. That's where they got it wrong." I nodded. "That's why they never understood me, either." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes but still carries peace. I poured us both another cup of tea. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. Two people who'd been pushed aside by the same machine, now finally watching it start to rust. Outside, the rain eased into a mist. Reese left just after midnight, his coat zipped up, his shoulders a little straighter than when he arrived. I locked the door behind him and stood there for a moment, hand still on the knob. Then I turned out the lights and went to bed. I didn't plan to attend the next board meeting, but someone put my name back on the guest list. I found out from my attorney the night before. He called while I was stacking the last of the takeout containers into the trash. "They sent out the board invite this evening," he said. "You weren't on it. But then, someone reinstated your voting rights at the last minute. Your name's on the list now, Kalis, with full authority." And I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Reese had quietly done more than bring the past to my doorstep. He'd opened the door for me to walk straight through it. The next morning was cold and overcast. I wore black. Not because it was a calculated choice, but because I wanted no color tied to that place. No softness, no warmth, just formality, distance, closure. I arrived 15 minutes early, enough time to gather my breath, but not enough for them to try anything clever. When the elevator opened on the top floor, I stepped into the reception of the boardroom. Familiar, stale. That neutral, overpriced art still hung on the walls, like someone once tried to convince themselves they had taste. Nothing had changed, except me. I pushed open the glass doors. The conversation inside halted like a needle ripped off vinyl. Diana froze. Julius's jaw tensed. The rest of the board members, some I'd once mentored, others who'd silently nodded as my name was erased, looked confused. "She's not on the list," Diana hissed, her voice just barely audible from across the table. But someone else rose before I could say a word. It was their new corporate counsel. A sharp-dressed man I hadn't met before, flipping open a thin folder. "Actually," he said with smooth confidence, "as of this morning, Ms. Rail holds majority voting rights. Legal verification is in your packets." There was a moment, a single breath, where no one moved. Then Julius stood up so quickly his chair tipped slightly. "You think you can waltz in here and—" I held up the folder in my hand and laid it down slowly onto the center of the table. "I'm not here to argue, Julius. I'm here because the truth deserves a seat." Next to the contract, stamped, signed, irrefutable, I placed the transcripts, the still images, the email chains, and finally, a copy of Reese's signed affidavit. One by one, heads tilted downward as eyes scanned the evidence. One executive at the end of the table mumbled, "We're in trouble." "You all knew," I said evenly, my voice firm but not loud. "And if you didn't, it's because you chose not to." Diana's hands trembled slightly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Julius leaned forward, his voice cracking. "You wouldn't dare bring this public." I finally sat down, looked at each of them, one by one, no malice, just clarity. "You miscalculated me from the beginning. You assumed silence meant surrender. It didn't." The room was quiet, but it buzzed with panic just beneath the surface, like the air before a summer storm, thick, charged. "I'm pressing for dissolution of this board," I announced, effective immediately, pending investigation. A few gasps. Some stiffened in protest, others leaned back, processing what that meant. This company was built on exploitation, lies, and I won't lead it. I won't salvage it, but I will no longer let it wear my name like armor. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. One by one, hands raised, hesitant, reluctant, but raised. Julius pounded the table. "You'll regret this, every one of you will." I stood up without reacting. There was nothing left to say to him. The lawyer confirmed the motion had passed. "It will be reported to the state attorney general and relevant federal entities for compliance oversight." I nodded, picked up the folder, and walked out. I didn't look back, not even when Diana called my name. I wasn't there to forgive. I wasn't there to reclaim. I was there to end it. The hallway felt longer on the way out, or maybe it was the weight lifting off me that made each step feel deeper. As I reached the street, the gray sky broke open. A light drizzle scattered over the sidewalk. Reporters gathered. Someone must have leaked the meeting. Microphones pointed. Voices surged. "Ms. Rail, are you taking back the company?" I paused. Let them crowd around me. Then I looked up, eyes steady. "No," I said calmly. "I'm taking my name back." I turned, stepped into the car waiting at the curb, and let the door shut behind me. The rain tapped gently on the window as the driver pulled away. But even then, I hadn't yet opened the envelope my father left in the vault, sealed, untouched, addressed only to me. The drive out to the estate was longer than I remembered, or maybe it just felt that way because I hadn't been back since the funeral. Fall had begun to claim the edges of the trees, and the long stone driveway crackled with crisp leaves under my tires. I parked outside the archive wing, the only part of the house I ever really felt belonged to me. Inside, the light had a colder tint than I expected. The room hadn't changed. Tall shelves lined with decades of binders, boxes labeled in my father's sharp handwriting, and one vault in the far corner. I didn't need directions. My fingers moved on instinct, turning the brass wheel, pulling open the heavy door. There it was. A single envelope sat on the velvet-lined shelf, yellowed slightly, sealed with wax. My name written across the front in the same pen he used to sign every Christmas card. Kalis. Only when the time is right. I sat down slowly, the envelope trembling a bit between my hands. For some reason, I expected it to weigh more, like the moment should have come with thunder, or a clock chiming in the distance, but all I heard was the soft tick of the archive room clock. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It began simply, "If you're reading this, then they did exactly what I feared." I swallowed hard. You always had the mind for what this company could become. They had the name, the charm, but you had the future, and that scared them. I paused, closing my eyes. That fear had cost me years. It had stolen birthdays, weekends, and, at one point, my sense of family. So I did something they couldn't undo. I filed the master system patent under your name. Quietly, legally. You are the rightful architect of what they profit from. And if they ever forget that, remind them. My breath caught in my throat. I ran my hand over the final page as though it could somehow confirm what I had just read. Don't let bitterness poison your soul. Let justice speak for itself. You were never invisible, Kalis. I saw you. I chose you. It was strange. Grief didn't hit me like a wave. It came more like a tide rising from within. I didn't sob. I didn't collapse. I simply sat there, letting tears slide silently down my cheeks as memories rose like smoke. I remembered being 6, sitting on his lap during a board meeting, swinging my legs under the table as he adjusted a graph on the screen. Everyone else had found it odd, but he never told me to leave. He said I belonged there. I remembered the quiet nod he gave me when I built the beta prototype by myself sophomore year. No big speech, no dramatic applause, just that steady look of pride. He'd always known. I stayed in the archive room until the sunlight faded, then flicked on the lamp beside the old desk. The letter sat beside me, unfolded now, as I picked up my phone and called Reese. He picked up on the second ring. "Kalis?" "We're not suing," I said. A pause. "You sure?" "Yes," I replied. "But we are reclaiming authorship. The patent is in my name. From now on, no one touches that tech without my signature." There was a slow, deliberate exhale on his end. "And they'll never sell another license without it," he said. "No," I answered. "They won't." I hung up, stood, and gathered the papers, the letter, the patent confirmation, everything I needed. I returned home well past midnight, but didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote certified notices to every major distributor, licensee, and global partner currently using our system. Each one said the same thing. Effective immediately, all technology operations involving the MasterKeen algorithm now require authorization from its registered author, Kalis Rael. By dawn, the letters were sealed, stacked neatly, ready to be delivered. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sky shift from slate to amber. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even triumphant, just quiet. There's a kind of peace that comes from being seen, especially after years of being dismissed. He knew they'd try to erase me, but he also knew I'd survive it. Not with noise or rage, but with proof. And in the end, that was enough. There was a moment, a small, still second, when I considered not opening it. I stood in the hallway, hand resting on the knob, listening to the soft whimper of a baby outside and the faint sound of rain dripping from the gutter. My heart beat a little faster, not because I feared what was on the other side, but because I already knew. I opened the door slowly. There she was, Diana, soaked from the drizzle, her hair tangled, mascara streaked. In her arms, a baby clung to her sweater, cheeks red from the cold. Her eyes met mine, and for a long breath neither of us said a word. Then she whispered, "They threw me out. Said I was never family. Not really. I have nowhere else to go." I didn't answer. I didn't nod. I just stepped aside. She walked in, slowly, quietly, as if she didn't quite believe I would let her. She didn't thank me. I didn't need her to. The door clicked shut behind us. In the kitchen, I set water on the stove and pulled 2 mismatched mugs from the shelf. She sat at the edge of the couch, rocking the child slowly, as if trying to soothe not just the baby, but herself. When I handed her the tea, her hands trembled as they wrapped around the ceramic. "They promised me everything," she said, staring into the steam. "Stock, a board seat, even my own team. All I had to do was help make sure you were out of the way." She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. "I told them you were too clinical, too detached, that the company needed a more relatable face. I said you couldn't lead with your heart." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Turns out they didn't want a woman to lead with anything. Once you were gone, I was just excess." I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "So now you're here." "I didn't come to beg," she said quickly. I needed to tell someone. I needed you to know I was wrong." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My first instinct was to remind her of the whispers she seated in the boardroom, of the signatures she gave to legal petitions behind my back, of the way she smiled the day they read me out of the executive summaries, as if I were never meant to exist. But instead, I stared at the baby in her arms, small, quiet, wrapped in a thin flannel blanket. "I don't forgive you," I said gently. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." She nodded. "I wouldn't ask you to." "But that child—" I exhaled slowly, feeling the knot in my chest loosen just enough to let the words out. "He doesn't deserve to inherit what we've been living, this cruelty, this legacy of using and discarding." Her lips pressed together, trembling. I walked to the drawer, pulled out a set of keys, and held them out. "Upstairs. First door on the right. Clean sheets. Bathrooms across the hall." She stared at the keys like they were glowing. "This isn't an erasure," I added. "This is me choosing not to become them." She took the keys silently, then rose, rocking the child in her arms, and climbed the stairs. I didn't follow. The days that followed moved slowly. Mornings passed with the sound of dishes clinking softly, the hum of lullabies upstairs. Diana stayed out of the way, quiet, never prying. I didn't ask how long she would be there, and she didn't ask if she could stay. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done. A week later, I walked through the doors of the building that once bore my father's name, now etched in brushed steel as Kalis Technologies for Human Impact. It had taken months of filings, more months of design overhaul, and a board reshuffle that would have made the old guard seethe if they were still around. But I wasn't interested in vengeance anymore. The new reception area was bright. Clean lines, natural light. A wall of framed portraits now included engineers, developers, even janitors, the very people whose work once went uncredited. At the far end, my name appeared not on a wall plaque or executive wing, but beneath the mission statement itself. Kalis. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a reclamation. In the last hallway before the lab wing, I stopped at the original blueprint, the schematic of our central system, the one they'd tried to sell under someone else's name. A small note now sat below the glass frame. Patent held by K.L. Arden. I pressed my palm against the cool surface and closed my eyes. They built their empire on my silence, but they never realized silence doesn't mean surrender, and it never meant defeat. I didn't win by destroying them. I won because I didn't become them,